The chandelier above the Hay Adams ballroom held 240 individual crystal drops, each one catching the light and throwing it back at the walls in fractured gold. Maya Cole had counted them 20 minutes ago, standing near the east wall with a glass of sparkling water. She had no intention of drinking, watching the room the way her father had taught her to watch every room she ever walked into. Not with her eyes, with everything else. The sound of the room told her more than any camera could. The way laughter clustered near the bar, too loud, two loose men trying to impress each other with the particular desperation of people who already had everything and were still somehow uncertain about it. The quiet near the windows, couples who had been married long enough to stop performing conversation. The low, careful murmur near the center of the room where Victor Harlan stood with three men in dark suits, and the particular stillness that powerful people carry when they know they are being watched and have stopped caring about it. She had studied Victor Harlan for 2 years. She knew the way he held his bourbon glass, two fingers on the base, never a full grip, the gesture of a man who had learned long ago that the most dangerous thing you can do is appear to want something too badly. She knew the slight angle of his left shoulder when he was listening, really listening as opposed to performing attention for the benefit of whoever was watching him perform it. She knew the way his eyes swept a room, not quickly, not obviously, but in long, slow arcs that looked casual and were anything but. He was sweeping the room now. She looked away before his gaze reached her. The dress she was wearing was black mid-length, chosen for reasons that had nothing to do with fashion. The fabric had a slight stretch that she had tested 3 days ago. Running through the full range of motion, she might need high-knee lateral pivot-controlled fall, and it had passed. The heels were 2 inches, not 3. In the event that she needed to move 2 inches was survivable. 3 was a liability. The small clutch at her wrist contained lip balm, a room key for a room she would never sleep in, and a tactical pen that could, under the right application of force and angle, produce outcomes that its manufacturer had not described in the marketing literature. She was wearing a name tag that read Maya Ashford, Defense Analytics Consultant. It was not her name, but it was close enough to the truth to be useful in the ways that mattered tonight. She was in the middle of recalibrating her read on the man standing to Harlan's left, too rigid in the shoulders, hired muscle pretending to be a colleague, the particular stillness of a man who was tracking the room rather than participating in it when she heard the sound. Not a loud sound, not a gunshot, not a shout, just the specific quality of movement that happens when someone large changes direction faster than the ambient noise of a crowded room expects. She felt it before she fully heard it. A hand closed around her arm from behind, not hard, not yet, and then the hand tightened, and then something cold and circular pressed against the right side of her head, just above the ear, and a voice said low and close and certain of itself, "Nobody move. The girl comes with us." The ballroom did what ballrooms do when guns appear in them. It stopped breathing. 260 people, all of them powerful in the way that Washington, D.C., produces powerful people, connected, credentialed, confident in the rooms they occupied. And every single one of them became very still and very small in the span of a single heartbeat. A champagne flute hit the marble floor somewhere to her left and shattered into a sound that was almost musical. Someone made a sound that was not quite a word and not quite a gasp. Maya did not move. She was counting. The hand on her arm, large right-handed, the grip of a man who trained with weights, but not with people. There was strength in it, but no technique, which meant the strength was the entire strategy. His thumb was positioned incorrectly too far forward, which meant when she moved the grip would fail before he could compensate. The barrel of the gun at her temple, pressure consistent, held by someone who believed in the threat he was making. Eastern European accent based on the vowels, the particular way the consonants compressed. The kind of hired professional who was very good at looking frightening and somewhat less practiced at handling situations that did not proceed exactly as planned. She registered 2 more men near the east doors, one near the bar, positioned to block that exit. This man behind her was the primary. He had made his first mistake when he chose her. He had made his second mistake when he got close enough to touch her. She closed her eyes for exactly 1 second. She thought of her father. Then she opened them, and in 2.3 seconds, everything changed. The sequence was not complicated. It was only fast, the kind of fast that takes years to build into the body until it stops requiring thought and becomes something more fundamental than instinct. A sharp rotation at the hips that broke the grip before he could compensate. A precise strike delivered to the 6th rib on his left side, not hard enough to fracture, hard enough to force an involuntary contraction of the lung and a corresponding loosening of every voluntary muscle in the upper body. In the fraction of a second when his arm went slack, She dropped her shoulder and stepped laterally out of the hold. His wrist came with her controlled, and the gun described a short arc away from her head and then fell, and she caught it before it reached the marble floor. She was behind him now. The gun was at his temple. Her breathing was even. The room had not yet processed what it had witnessed. "Would someone like to explain," she said to no one in particular, and everyone simultaneously, "how this man knows my real name?" Nobody in the ballroom moved. Nobody in the ballroom spoke. In the back of the room near the service entrance, a man in his early 30s with close-cropped dark hair in a suit that was slightly too good for a government salary stared at her with an expression she would think about later. Not surprise. Something more precise than surprise, the controlled adjustment of a man confirming a calculation he had already run. His name was Garrett Finch. She didn't know that yet, but she would. 20 hours earlier, the apartment in Arlington was small by the standards of people who had never needed to think carefully about which rooms had exits. By Maya Cole's standards, it was exactly right. One door and one window that opened onto the fire escape, clear sightlines from the kitchen to the front hallway furniture that had been chosen with the logic of someone who might need to move quickly in the dark and could not afford anything that would catch a knee or slow a step. She did not think of this as fear. She thought of it as accuracy. There was a difference, even if most people who had not spent time in places where the difference mattered would not understand the distinction. It was 5:47 in the morning when she began her routine. The pull-up bar was mounted in the doorframe between the bedroom and the bathroom. She had installed it herself the day she moved in using a drill borrowed from the building super and returned the same afternoon. The vest she wore for the first 20 minutes weighed 40 pounds. The movement was not rushed and not performative. No mirror, no audience, just the body doing what the body had been asked to do every morning for 8 years in training facilities and forward operating bases, and once on the roof of a structure in a location whose coordinates she was not authorized to specify. After the pull-ups came the footwork drills, the floor cleared of the furniture she moved every night before sleeping and replaced every morning after training. After the drills came a shower cold for the final 90 seconds, a habit acquired in BUD/S that she had never managed to abandon, partly because some rational part of her understood that cold water improved cortisol response, and partly because a less rational part of her believed that discomfort was keeping her honest. She made coffee, black. She drank it standing at the kitchen window, watching the street below arrive at itself in the gray early light, the delivery trucks, the dog walkers, the woman who jogged past every morning at exactly 6:15 with the focused expression of someone who had scheduled this as the only hour of the day that belonged entirely to her. On the shelf beside the kitchen doorway, there was one photograph. It was face down. It had been face down since she moved in. She did not need to see it to know exactly what it contained. The angle of the man's shoulders, the curve of his arm around the child he was holding, the specific quality of his smile, which was not the smile he produced for other people, but the one reserved for moments when his guard had dropped far enough for something real to come through. The back of the photograph read, "For Maya, be harder than the world expects you to be. Dad, 1998. She had been 3 years old when it was taken. She had been 14 when he died. She had spent the 12 years since then becoming the kind of person who was very, very difficult to kill." The phone rang at 7:19. The number was not saved in her contacts. She had been expecting it for the better part of 2 days. She answered on the second ring and said nothing. "Continental." That was all Briggs said. The line went dead. She put the phone in her jacket pocket, looked at the face-down photograph on the shelf for a moment, without touching it, and went to get her keys. Thomas Briggs had a face that had lived in weather for 62 years and showed every one of them without apology. He had been in sequence a Ranger at 22, a Green Beret at 26, and finally an operator with 1st SFODD, a Delta Force for 11 years before a piece of RPG shrapnel in Mogadishu in October of 1993 removed a significant portion of the muscle from his left calf and ended a conversation with an Army surgeon in a manner that was not negotiable. The limp this left him with was barely perceptible to anyone who was not looking for it. Everything else it left him with was not visible at all, but was present in the way he sat in the corner booth of the Continental Diner with his back against the wall and both hands flat on the table, and his eyes moving in slow, periodic arcs across the room every 90 seconds, in a pattern so ingrained he was no longer aware he was doing it. He had a cup of coffee, black, untouched. When Maya sat down across from him, he did not greet her. He looked at her for a moment in the way that people who have survived difficult things look at each other, a brief, complete inventory, and then he looked at the table. "Harland is moving," he said. She wrapped both hands around her own mug. Outside the diner window, Columbia Pike was thickening with the morning's traffic. A woman pushed a stroller past the glass at a pace that suggested she was running late for something. A man in a postal uniform leaned against a mailbox with his phone. Normal. Ordinary. The city conducting its business without interest in what was happening in this booth. She had spent years training herself not to be envious of ordinary. Moving how? She asked. Briggs reached into his jacket and placed a photograph on the table between them without explanation. It showed a building industrial waterfront, the kind of structure that existed in the geography between cities where no one looked too carefully at what went in and what came out. Maryland Coast, he said, 25 miles southeast of Annapolis. Registered as a seafood storage facility. The company that owns it was incorporated in Delaware 18 months ago, and as far as our people can determine, has never stored any actual seafood. 48 hours. He looked up from the photograph. How did you? You called on a Monday. He prefers Wednesdays. He has always preferred Wednesdays. She said it without expression. I've been watching him for 2 years, Rook. Something moved across his face that she chose not to name. He picked up his coffee and held it without drinking. There is a gala tonight, he said. Hay Adams Ballroom. Defense industry fundraiser, the kind of event where nobody asks what anyone actually does for a living because everyone already knows and nobody wants it spoken aloud. Harland will be there. I know. Our asset Inside Vantage confirmed he's expecting a delivery tonight. Not at the gala is cover or entertainment or both. The actual exchange happens at the Maryland facility on Wednesday. But tonight he's meeting someone. Someone with access to something he needs. The drive, she said. Briggs looked at her with an expression she filed away. The drive, he said, then quieter after a moment, that's what they're calling it. He set his coffee down. There is also a young man, 20 years old, first-year analyst at the agency. Name is Tanner Locke. He was assigned last week to a low-level review of Vantage Strategic Group's public contracting filings routine work, the kind given to new people to establish process familiarity. He is not trained for field work. He is not operational. He is, as best I can determine, a kid from Charlottesville who performed well at the University of Virginia and wanted to serve something larger than himself. She waited. He found something in the filings, Briggs said. I don't know precisely what. He flagged it to his supervisor who passed it up the chain, and at some point in that chain, the flag reached a person whose loyalty is not entirely what their position implies. That person passed Tanner's name and description to individuals connected to Harlan. Tanner does not know this. He went into work this morning believing he performed a routine function correctly. Is he in the building tonight? He was assigned to observe from a peripheral support position. Briggs paused. It was not my call. She looked at him. It's a lure. He did not answer. The not answering was itself an answer. There's also a CIA analyst named Garrett Finch, he said. 31. Counterintelligence Division attached to the Harlan monitoring file for 8 months. He's been read into the operation and will be in the room tonight in a support role. He knows your cover, Maya Ashford Defense Analytics. Treat him as a resource. How much does he know about me? Briggs picked up his coffee again. This time he drank. What I told him. She held his gaze for a moment, then looked at the photograph of the Maryland facility. Who authorized this operation? People who trust me. Who do you trust? He set the mug down carefully. You. Outside on Columbia Pike, a bus went by and the diner windows trembled faintly in their frames. A cook called something in the kitchen. The ordinary machinery of a Tuesday morning running itself with no awareness of anything else. Tonight, she said. Tonight, he said. She left $2 on the table for coffee she had barely touched and walked out into the morning without looking back. There is a particular kind of silence that lives inside certain memories. Not quiet. Silence is different from quiet. Quiet is the absence of sound. Silence has weight and texture and temperature. You feel it the way you feel weather, not just against the skin, but somewhere deeper in whatever place the body uses to store the things the mind has not yet finished with. She had carried this silence for 12 years. It lived in a specific memory, not the memory of the officer who came to the door, not the memory of her mother's face in the moment of understanding, not the memorial that lasted 40 minutes and answered nothing. The memory was from the summer, 2 years before all of that. Her father was home on a Tuesday in June of 2010, which happened so rarely that her mother had made his favorite dinner without being asked, and the smell of it had come through the screen door when Maya got home from school. He had been home for 3 days, which was already unusual. He had been quiet in a way that was different from his usual quiet. His usual quiet was the quiet of a man who did not need to fill space, who was comfortable in the presence of silence. This quiet had something behind it. He came out to the back porch where she was sitting and brought 2 glasses of lemonade, and he sat down beside her without announcement, without preamble, the way he always entered any space completely and with full attention on what was in front of him. He lit a match. He held it up between them. The flame tilted slightly, almost imperceptibly, toward the northeast. "What does that tell you?" he asked. She was 12 years old, and she thought about it seriously, the way he had taught her to think about things, not rushing to the first answer, letting the question sit for the length of a breath. "Wind's coming from the southwest." "Right." He shook the match out. "Wind never lies, Maya. It doesn't have a reason to. It just is what it is doing, what physics requires it to do. No agenda?" He set the matchbook on the porch railing. "People are more complicated." She had understood the words. She had not yet understood what they were about. She understood now. 2 years after that afternoon on the porch, a young officer with very clean shoes and very careful eyes came to their door and told her mother that Master Chief Raymond Cole had died in a training accident. The details were classified. The investigation was complete. They were very sorry. The details were classified. She had spent 12 years becoming the kind of person who could find out what that meant. The safe house in Rosslyn was a third-floor apartment above a dry cleaner on a street where no one paid particular attention to who came and went, which was the point of it. She arrived at 1 in the afternoon and spent 40 minutes in a room with Garrett Finch, a laptop, 2 printed briefing packets, and the particular quality of attention she allocated to situations where the information she was given and the information she was not given were equally important. Finch was 31, compact, with close-cropped dark hair and a face that was handsome in a way designed by nature to be forgettable, a useful quality in counterintelligence work. He spoke efficiently. He used precise language. He answered her direct questions without deflecting. She noted during the briefing that he positioned himself at the midpoint between the room's door and its window, not at the table, not against the far wall, but at precisely the point that gave him the longest sight line to every person in the room and the shortest path to either exit. This was not the positioning of an analyst who happened to prefer standing. This was tactical positioning. And people who were not supposed to be tactical, but were generally had a reason for the gap between appearance and reality. She allocated him 55% confidence and filed the positioning without comment. "Your cover is solid," he said, spreading the annotated ballroom floor plan across the table. "Ashford Analytics is a registered Delaware LLC, principals, cooperative professional history documented to 7 years, including conference appearances and published white papers. It would survive a careful afternoon of scrutiny. And a careful week. That's a different question. Is it the question we're facing tonight?" He looked at her steadily. "We believe not." She studied the floor plan. 3 entries to the main ballroom, 2 service corridors, 1 freight elevator. Harlan's security contingent at events of this scale typically ran 2 to 4 personal protection agents, depending on his read of the environment. "Where will Tanner Locke be?" she asked. Something shifted in Finch's expression. "Controlled almost immediately, but not quite quickly enough. That's peripheral to your primary objective tonight. He's in the building, in a support observation position. He's bait," she said. Finch held her gaze. He did not confirm or deny, which was confirmation enough. "All right," she said. She looked at the floor plan and thought about a 20-year-old kid from Charlottesville who had flagged an anomaly in a public filing because it was the right thing to do and was now going to be positioned in a ballroom full of people who employed violence as a business tool. She adjusted her read on the evening's primary objective accordingly. The dress passed every test. The heels were 2 inches. The clutch contained what it needed to contain. She stood in the safe house bathroom and looked at herself in the mirror for exactly 5 seconds, long enough to confirm that Maya Ashford, defense analytics consultant, was present and believable, not long enough to think about anything else. She put in the earpiece, small, flesh-colored, fitted to her right ear. Briggs's voice came through it immediately. "Comms check." "Clear," she said. "I'm staged on 8th Street. I'll stay mobile. Secondary exit is through the kitchen corridor if you need it. Exits to the alley on the south side." "Copy." A pause. "Maya." She looked at herself in the mirror one more time. "I'm always careful," she said. "It's not the same as safe, but it'll do." The Hay Adams had been built in 1927 on the site of 2 earlier mansions belonging to men whose relationship to American power had been intimate and complicated, and something of that history had settled into the building's bones. The dark paneling, the particular quality of the light, the sense that the room itself was listening to the conversations held within it with the patience of something that had been listening for a very long time. She arrived at 7:42. She signed in as Maya Ashford, accepted the name tag, and entered the ballroom. 260 people. The full taxonomy of Washington's defense and intelligence ecosystem, contractors, attorneys, retired officials who had learned where the money moved when it left government lobbyists, who understood that the most important conversations never happened in the rooms where decisions were officially made. The noise was the noise of people who considered themselves important and were not entirely wrong about it. She found her position along the east wall. She counted the chandelier drops. She watched Victor Harlan. He stood near the center of the room with the ease of a man for whom rooms like this one had stopped being experiences and become simply environment stages on which a familiar performance was expected and delivered. He was 58 years old and looked 53. His suit was charcoal gray, his tie muted burgundy, and the way he occupied physical space communicated authority through posture and breath, rather than volume or gesture, the authority of someone who had long since stopped needing to prove anything. She had read everything available about Victor Harlan, his CIA career, his public statements, his company's filings, his philanthropy, his known associations, and the silence between all of these things, the gaps where the important material lived. She knew what Operation Black Compass was. She knew what it had done and what it had cost. She knew who had discovered it and what had happened to that person. She kept this knowledge at a fixed distance, not suppressed, simply held apart the way you hold a heavy thing when your hands need to be free. She was 40 minutes into her observation when she noticed Tanner Locke. He was standing just inside the northern entrance, sandy-haired, maybe 20 years old, wearing a suit that was slightly too formal for his face and slightly too large in the shoulders, the universal signal of a young person who had dressed for someone else's idea of an occasion. He was doing the thing that untrained people do when they are trying not to look like they are watching a room. He was looking at the room so carefully that his carefulness was itself the most visible thing in his immediate vicinity. She watched him for 40 seconds without turning to face him. In that time, he checked his phone twice, adjusted his lapel, and looked twice toward the service corridor on the northern wall. He had the expression of someone who genuinely believed that what he was doing here mattered, the specific brightness of uncorrupted purpose, which was the most dangerous thing to carry into a room like this one because it was entirely visible to the people who preyed on it. She started moving. She was moving along the east wall in a wide arc, positioning herself between Tanner and the nearest of Harlan's protection agents who had noted him. She was now certain the agent's gaze, having settled in that direction 3 times in the past 4 minutes, when the room's atmosphere changed behind her. Large, fast, wrong direction. The hand closed on her arm. The barrel came to her temple. The voice made its announcement to a room that immediately held its breath. She processed grip technique, barrel pressure, accent, position of secondary personnel. But all of it in the space between recognition and response resolved into a single coherent picture. The picture told her exactly what to do. 2.3 seconds. She had built this sequence into her body over 7 years of repetition in conditions ranging from the controlled to the actively hostile. BUD/S had given her the foundation 24 weeks of the most demanding military training in the world, including 5.5 days of Hell Week, during which she did not sleep, did not stop moving, and did not ring the bell. 3 combat deployments had given her the application. And something older than either of those things, something inherited from a man who had lit matches on a porch in summer and told her the wind never lied, had given her the stillness at the center of it. The rotation, the strike to the 6th rib, the exit from the hold, the arc of the weapon, the catch. She was behind him. The gun was at his temple. Her breathing was even. Would someone like to explain how this man knows my real name? The room had not yet fully processed what it had witnessed. At the back of the room near the service entrance, Garrett Finch watched her with the expression of a man confirming a calculation rather than receiving new information. She noted this. She filed it in the place she kept things that were not ready to be acted on but were not safe to discard. What followed had the quality of a scene that everyone present would later remember differently. Hotel security arrived. 2 of Harlan's agents materialized, and then, assessing the situation with professional accuracy, chose not to complicate it. The man she had disarmed was escorted aside, large, professionally silent, offering nothing. His colleagues at the east doors made the correct calculation about the advisability of any additional moves in the vicinity of the woman who had just resolved the situation in the time it took most people to understand it was happening. She relinquished the weapon to hotel security after ensuring the serial numbers had been photographed by her phone. She declined 3 separate offers of assistance. She found Tanner Locke exactly where she had last seen him standing, with the expression of someone whose mental framework had just received information it was not equipped to process. She walked to him directly. "Tanner Locke," she said. He blinked. "Yes. You need to come with me right now. I'm supposed to stay in, and whoever assigned you that position is not currently in this room." "I am." She kept her voice level and her eyes on the service corridor. "You have about 90 seconds before the situation in this room becomes more complex. I'd like to use them." He followed her. She had expected this. Decisive people were followed. It was one of the most reliable facts she knew about human behavior. The service corridor smelled of warming trays and industrial cleaner. The noise of the ballroom fell away behind them as they moved through a door marked staff only and into a stairwell, fluorescent, functional, honest in the way that back-of-house spaces are always more honest than what they support. She stopped and turned to face him. "Are you hurt?" "No, what just happened?" "Someone tried to use you." She said it without softening it. "Or they tried to use me and you were positioned adjacent. I'm still determining which." "Who were those men?" "Associated with a man named Victor Harlan. You know that name." The change in his expression confirmed it without requiring speech. "I'm not asking you to breach your authorization," she said, reading what was forming behind his eyes. "I'm telling you that whatever you found in those Vantage filings was significant enough that the people who protect Harlan knew your name and face before you walked into that room tonight. Your flag went up the chain and reached someone whose loyalty isn't what their position implies. Tonight was not a random security incident." He was quiet, processing. "In the filings," she said, "what did you find?" He looked at her for a long moment. Whatever he was measuring, he apparently reached a conclusion about it. "Disbursements," he said. "Payments that didn't match any contracted work going back to 2009. The recipient companies, when I searched them, all traced to the same holding structure, and the holding structure had a name attached to it for sure from a prior internal audit. A government employee." She kept her voice even. "What name?" He looked at her. "Cole," he said. "Raymond Cole." The fluorescent light above them hummed its single note. She heard the name the way you hear the name of something you have been moving toward for a very long time, not with surprise, but with the specific sensation of arrival, a thing coming to rest after a long and difficult distance. "What else?" she said. "There was a reference in an email chain to a document I couldn't access. The title was Operation Black Compass." She stood with that for a moment. Then she took out her phone and typed to Briggs Service Corridor East Stairs. "H Street exit. Bring Locke in." "Tanner," she said, "in a few minutes a man named Thomas Briggs is going to take you somewhere safe. You're going to stay there until I tell you otherwise. Can you do that?" He looked at her with those eyes that were still deciding what they were going to be. "Who are you?" he asked. Not the surface question, the real one underneath it. She gave him the only honest answer available. "Someone who has been looking for that name for a very long time." Briggs took Tanner out through the H Street exit at 9:44. She watched them go, and then she turned back toward the lobby. Garrett Finch was standing near the ballroom entrance with his hands in his jacket pockets. He had been positioned there long enough that his waiting had the quality of anticipation rather than reaction. He had gotten there before anyone called him. "That was not the plan," he said. "Someone engaged with me. Through hotel security and through Harlan's personnel, I understand. But the man who approached me knew my real name. Not the cover, my actual name." Something moved across Finch's face. It was controlled almost immediately. "That's a significant security concern. We'll need to—" "We will," she said. "I'd like to start that conversation tonight. All of us together with our chain of command." She held his gaze. "I'll be there in 10 minutes. I need to make one call." He left. She walked to the far end of the lobby and typed a message to a number that was not saved in her contacts, that routed through 3 separate servers before reaching its destination, and that she paid for in the currency that certain people in certain positions preferred to money. The message read, "Run Garrett Finch. Past 6 months. Everything he touched connected to Vantage, to Raymond Cole, to Black Compass. All of it. Tonight." She sent it. She stood in the lobby of the Hay Adams and looked at nothing in particular for a moment. She thought about the drive, the encrypted drive that Finch had spent so much of their briefing discussing, so many questions circling its location, its contents, its chain of custody. She thought about the specific quality of those questions. She thought about what she carried. The 47 names. The operational details of a network running across 9 countries. documented once in a paper file that had been destroyed through a process she was not authorized to describe, and after that existing in exactly one place. Her memory. She was the drive. She had known this for 3 years. She had not known until tonight that Harlan knew it too, which meant the question was not what Harlan intended to receive tonight. The question was what he intended to extract. And the question that followed from that, with the cold precision of mathematics, was how long Garrett Finch had been aware of it. She put her phone away. She walked back toward the conference room where Garrett Finch was waiting. She pushed open the door. "Sorry to keep you waiting," she said. She sat down and she listened, and she watched the specific places where information moved behind his eyes, and she said very little. And at the end of the meeting, she thanked him and shook his hand and walked out into the cold November night of Washington, D.C., and stood on the sidewalk for a moment with the city moving around her in its ordinary way. Then she walked to the parking garage on the next block and sat in a car that wasn't running and held a phone that had not yet received a reply and looked through the windshield at the concrete wall and thought about what she now understood. 3 minutes later, the reply came 6 words. "Confirm. Move fast. Check everything now." She thought about a flame tilting in the dark and a man who had told her some things simply were what they were and did not require interpretation. She thought about what she was going to do about what she now understood. Then she started the car. The safe house smelled of cold coffee and newer tension. It was the third-floor apartment in Rosslyn, unremarkable from the street, its windows facing west, so that the morning light arrived late and gray filtered through the kind of overcast sky that settles over Washington in November and does not resolve. A folding table, 3 chairs, a whiteboard imperfectly wiped, its ghost writing still visible in the surface, partial words and arcs that could have meant anything. Tanner Locke sat in one of the chairs with his elbows on his knees and the particular posture of a young person who has spent a night being systematically introduced to complexity he had not previously known existed. He had slept approximately 2 hours. Maya knew this because she had not slept at all and had been in the apartment since 3 in the morning, and she had heard him stop moving sometime around 5, and she had been standing at the window with a cup of cold coffee watching the street since before that. Outside, a delivery truck was backing into the alley below its warning signal, steady and indifferent. A woman walked past with a dog. A man in a gray coat stopped at the corner to check his phone and then moved on. Normal. Ordinary. The city going about its business without any interest in what was happening on the third floor above the dry cleaner. "You grew up in Charlottesville," she said. He looked up. "Yeah. Your father was in the engineering department at the university." A brief pause. He had not told her this. "How did you your file before last night?" "Not because you were under investigation. Because Briggs gave me background on everyone connected to this operation, and you were one of them." He considered this in the manner of someone adding information to a picture that was becoming clearer and less comfortable as it developed. "The people who connected me to Harlan," he said, "they had my file too." "Yes." He sat back. He looked at the ceiling for a moment, with the expression of someone running the calculation that every principled young person eventually runs, the one where you measure what you believe the system was against what the evidence is showing you it actually is, and you have to find somewhere to put the difference between those two things. "I flagged an anomaly in a public filing," he said. "That's what you're supposed to do. That's the entire point of the review process." "I know. And because I did the thing I was supposed to do, someone passed my name to a man who put armed personnel in a hotel ballroom." "Yes. That's not how it's supposed to work." "No," she said, "it isn't." She sat down across from him and looked at him directly without performing the concern she actually had. "Here's what I need you to understand. The anomaly you found, Black Compass, the name attached to it, that is real. The fact that your flag was intercepted before reaching anyone who would have acted on it honestly, that is also real. What happened to you last night, it is not a malfunction in a functioning system. It is the system working exactly as certain people have arranged for it to work." He was quiet. "Does that make sense?" she asked. "It makes sense. I don't like it." "That's the correct response," she said. "People who like it end up working for Harlan." He looked at her for a moment. The name in the filings, Raymond Cole. He said it carefully, watching her face. "Is that—" "Yes," she said. He nodded once and did not pursue it further. She noted this. He understood the shape of what he was adjacent to and was smart enough to recognize which doors were not currently open to him. She respected this more than she expected to. "What happens now?" he asked. "We wait for a phone call," she said. The phone call came 43 minutes later. She recognized the number because she had memorized it. She answered without speaking. The voice on the other end was unhurried and smooth, the particular texture of a man who had spent decades practicing the art of sounding like nothing in particular. Unmarked, the verbal equivalent of a room that has been stripped of identifying features. Ms. Cole, Victor Harlan said, I think we've established that formalities between us are somewhat beside the point. She said nothing. I'd like to meet, he said, properly, without the theater of last night. There are things about your father that you don't know, and things about what I have done, and why, that you haven't had the opportunity to consider, and I would like to change both of those things. I'm prepared to come without my protection team. He said this last part in the tone of a man who understood it was the only offer she would accept, which confirmed that he had thought carefully about this call and about her. Where, she said, he named a restaurant in Georgetown, a private room, that evening, 8 o'clock. I'll be there, she said. She ended the call and looked at Tanner, who had heard enough to understand the shape of it. You're going, he said. Yes. Is that, he searched for the right framing, is that the safest approach? It's the necessary one, she said. Those aren't always the same thing. She called Briggs. He arrived within the hour, and he came in the way he always came into rooms, the door opening, slowly one complete assessment of the space, before he committed his body to entering the inventory of windows and exits and occupants running automatically beneath whatever his face was doing. He was 62 years old, and the habits of Delta Force ran through him so deep they had stopped being habits and become simply the way he occupied the world. He looked at Tanner. Tanner looked at him. Whatever Tanner had expected of a man described as former Delta Force Briggs, in his canvas jacket and work boots, with a face that looked like a map of a life that had not been gentle, appeared to both confirm and significantly exceed the expectation. You'll stay here, Briggs told him, with the directness of someone who had issued many orders and had stopped apologizing for the fact. Tonight, possibly tomorrow, until we understand the full shape of the exposure. Tanner looked at Maya. She gave him a small nod. All right, he said. She and Briggs stepped into the hallway. The carpet was the color of something that had once been burgundy and had made its peace with being brown. Georgetown, 8 o'clock, private room. He says no protection team. Briggs was quiet with the quiet of a man who had a great deal of it and was selecting carefully. He's going to tell you about your father. I know. Some of it will be true. I know. He'll construct a frame for you. Enough truth to make the frame credible, and then the frame becomes a mechanism. I know, Rook. He looked at the wall. Outside the hallway window, a pigeon landed on the sill, reconsidered, and left. Wire, he said. Full kit. I'll be on M Street. If comms go dark, then I come in anyway. He looked at her with the specific look of a man who had made a decision he was not interested in revisiting. I come in regardless. She held his gaze and nodded. She went back into the apartment to prepare, and she thought about Harlan calling her on a number he should not have had, and what that said about the architecture of the breach and about Garrett Finch and the expression on his face in the ballroom that was not surprise. She prepared. The restaurant occupied a narrow building on a Georgetown side street between a bookstore that had been there since the 70s and a tailor shop of irregular hours. Dark wood low-light tables spaced with the deliberateness of an establishment whose clientele valued the distance between their conversations and other people's ears. Briggs's voice came through at 7:54. On M Street, signal is clean. You have 2 exits, kitchen to the south alley or the front. Copy. One of his vehicles is staged on the next block. Protection team is there but not close. Consistent with what he said. Good. She went in. The private room was at the back through a hallway lined with wine bottles she did not look at. The door was slightly ajar. Through the gap she could see warm light and a white tablecloth, and the back of a head's silver hair maintained the posture of a man who had sat in rooms of this kind for 50 years and reached an accommodation with them. She went in. Victor Harlan stood when she entered, not with the performance of formality, but with something more considered, the gesture of a man who understood the weight of what he was asking her to do by being in the same room with him, and was acknowledging it in the only way immediately available. Thank you for coming, he said. She sat. She placed her clutch on the table within reach. She did not touch the menu or the water glass he poured. You wanted to talk about my father, she said. He sat. He looked at her directly, not the practiced gaze of a man performing sincerity, but the tired gaze of a man who had run out of the energy required to perform it. Raymond Cole was the most principled man I ever worked with, he said. I want to begin there, not as preamble or strategy, because it is true, and because nothing I tell you tonight should be taken as a diminishment of who he was. She waited. I met him in 1991. Desert Storm. I was a young CIA officer attached to a special operations task force that does not have a public designation. We worked together for 11 days in Kuwait. I watched him perform under conditions that would have broken most men, and he did not break, and he did not hesitate, and he made decisions in the dark that I am still not certain I could have made with full light and time and all the information in the world. He paused. He also saved my life, directly, on the third day after Kuwait City was liberated. I will not describe the circumstances in detail. What I will tell you is that he did not hesitate. He saw what the situation required, and he provided it without calculation or delay. She kept her hands still on the table. I'm telling you this because you deserve to know that what happened between us, later the decisions I made, and what followed from them, were not the actions of a man who did not know your father or did not value him. They were the actions of a man who made choices that his relationship to Raymond Cole does not and cannot justify. I offer that history as context, not as excuse. What was Operation Black Compass? She said, Tom. He had expected the question. His expression did not change. A program I built and ran from 1993 to 2003, he said. The stated purpose was legitimate, developing and maintaining human intelligence assets across Eastern Europe and parts of the Middle East in the post-Cold War vacuum when the traditional intelligence architecture had effectively collapsed, and we were operating largely without structure or meaningful oversight. That part was real. The assets were real. The intelligence they generated was real, and in several cases materially significant to American security interests. He paused. And the rest of it, he said, was that the information those assets generated was valuable in ways that extended beyond what the government was using it for. And over a period of years, I made arrangements to capture some portion of that value differently. He said it plainly, meeting her eyes. I sold intelligence through intermediaries, through financial structures designed to obscure the transactions to parties who paid for information and used it for purposes I did not always know and did not always want to know. The restaurant's ambient noise came through the wall, silverware, and low conversation, the ordinary sound of people having ordinary evenings. When did my father find out? She said. 2009, Harlan said. He encountered the financial architecture through channels I had not anticipated. Once he found the edge of it, he followed it methodically because that was who he was, thorough in a way that made him exceptional, and in this instance, dangerous to me. He picked up his water glass and set it down without drinking. He came to me directly, he said, which I tell you because it is consistent with who he was. He did not go to the Inspector General. He did not go to the committee. He came to me and told me what he knew and gave me 60 days to correct it. He was giving me the opportunity to address it without catastrophe. Did you use the 60 days to correct it? No. Simply. No elaboration. What did you use them for? To determine the extent of what he knew and who else he had told. He folded his hands on the tablecloth. He had told no one. For 2 years after that initial conversation, he continued to gather evidence, continued to document with the methodical thoroughness that was characteristic of everything he did, and he told no one, not because he was uncertain about what to do, but because he wanted the case to be complete. He had seen incomplete cases collapse. He had watched guilty people walk because the foundation had holes. He wanted Black Compass to be airtight. And in 2011, he moved. He had prepared a full report for the Senate Intelligence Committee. He had a meeting scheduled. He told one person, someone he had served with, someone he trusted without reservation, that he was going. And that person told me. The name lived in the room without either of them saying it. And then he died in a training accident, she said. Yes, Harlan said. The word arrived and lay there. 4 letters, 12 years. She looked at the candle flame in the center of the table. Steady, burning without drama in the still air of the private room. Before she could respond, Briggs's voice came through the earpiece, compressed, controlled, carrying, beneath the control, something she recognized as effort. Maya, I've lost the secondary signal. Still on comms with you, but my visual on the street approach just went dark. Someone is running a localized jam on the cameras between 8th Street and static, the deliberate kind. At the same moment, the door to the private room opened. Not the maitre d', not restaurant staff. 2 men. Large, professional, with the quality of movement that indicates people who have been given a specific directive and are not interested in the room's response to it. They were not Harlan's people. She knew this because Harlan's expression changed, the first involuntary thing she had seen on his face since she walked in. She was on her feet before the thought had finished forming, because the body has a faster process than conscious reasoning, and she had spent years trusting it. The table between her and the two men gave her a half-second of additional distance. She used it. The nearer man looked at Harlan. "We need the woman." "That was not the arrangement," Harlan said, with a coldness that was genuine. The arrangement changed. She had approximately 2 seconds. The information she needed from this room was worth more than the resolution of these two men, and the resolution of these two men was something she could accomplish, but not without noise and time she did not currently have. She chose information. She put her hands slightly up. Not surrender, simply the pause of someone who is deciding, rather than someone who has decided, and she looked at the second man while appearing to look at the first. The second man fractionally and involuntarily glanced toward his jacket pocket, where a phone would be. Someone had called them in real time. Someone who was watching the situation from outside and had made the decision to intervene at precisely this moment when she was alone with Harlan in a private room talking about Black Compass. Not Harlan. Harlan had not sent them and did not want them here. She thought about who knew about this meeting. Harlan, who proposed it. Briggs, who she had told. And one other person who had been in the Roslyn safe house when the decision was made. She thought about Garrett Finch and the position he had chosen in that room, not at the table, not against the wall, but at the point that gave him the longest sightline to every occupant. She thought, of course. She said to Harlan, without looking away from the men, "We are going to finish this conversation," he said with the tone of someone rapidly recalibrating. "Yes, we are." Then she demonstrated with efficiency rather than drama the specific reasons why a 26-year-old woman who had completed Butte Dedis as ranked third in her class and served 3 combat deployments was not a woman that 2 professionals had been adequately briefed on before being sent to collect her from a Georgetown restaurant. The nearer man had the same fundamental problem as the man at the Hay Adams. He had performed an assessment based on appearance rather than information, and appearance in this case was aggressively misleading. The assessment failed him at the moment it was tested. It failed him quietly and completely, and without breaking anything in the restaurant, which she considered a courtesy to the establishment. The second man looked at his colleague and then at her, and then made the correct professional calculation. "All right," he said. She straightened her dress. She looked at Harlan, whose expression had traveled through several registers and arrived somewhere between professional apprehension and an involuntary respect that he appeared to find inconvenient. "At a time and place of my choosing," she said. "We finish this." "I think that's reasonable," he said. She left through the kitchen corridor to the south alley. The cold November air came at her face, and she stood against the alley wall for a moment with her back to the brick. The comms came back immediately. The jamming had stopped when she left the building. 2 minutes out, Briggs said. His voice was controlled, barely. "South alley, I'm fine." "What happened?" "2 men came in, not Harlan's." A pause. "Who's—" "That's the question," she said. "But I have a direction." She looked up at the narrow strip of sky between the buildings. The clouds had come in fully while she was in the restaurant, and no stars were visible, just the orange ambient glow of the city bouncing off the underside of the cloud cover. She thought about Garrett Finch asking again and again in different formulations about the drive. She thought about what it meant that he had known before she walked into the gala. She thought about what it meant that he had sent 2 men into a Georgetown restaurant to stop a conversation. He was afraid of what Harlan might tell her, which meant he knew what Harlan had to tell her, which meant he had known from the beginning. Briggs's car swept the alley with its headlights and found her. She walked toward it. There was still work to do. She was not interested in wasting the time she had left. The answer arrived 6 hours later in a file accessed through a channel that did not officially exist, assembled by a man who had spent 11 years at the National Security Agency before a principled disagreement with his directorate produced a principled departure, and who had retained in private practice a facility with government data architecture that made him expensive and consistently worth the cost. She read the file in the passenger seat of Briggs's car parked on a side street in Georgetown, with the engine off and the city moving quietly beyond the glass. Tanner was at the safe house. Briggs sat with both hands flat on his thighs, in old stillness, the posture of a man containing something he had not yet decided what to do with. "You can say it," she told him. "Say what?" "Whatever has been sitting behind your eyes since we left Roslyn this morning." He was quiet for a moment. Outside, a taxi went by with its light off. A couple walked along the sidewalk ahead, arms linked, heads inclined toward each other, the posture of a conversation that was about something real. "How much did he tell you?" Briggs said. "Harlan?" That black compass ran from 1993 to 2003. That my father found it in 2009. That he came to Harlan directly and gave him 60 days. That he spent 2 years building the case before he moved. That when he moved, he told one person. She looked at the couple until they turned a corner and were gone. And that person told Harlan. The car was quiet. "Rook," she said. He said nothing. "Was it you?" The silence lasted 4 seconds. She counted them with the same precision she counted everything. "No," he said. "It wasn't me." She believed him. Not because she was certain she was not often certain of anything, but because she had known this man for 23 years from the time she was 3 years old, and he came to the house in Virginia Beach after deployments with her father, and she had watched him in situations that tested what a person actually was beneath what they appeared to be, and what Briggs actually was did not include the shape of that particular lie. "You know who it was," she said. His hands did not move from his thighs. "We don't have to do this tonight," he said. "Yes," she said, "we do." He nodded once, the slow nod of a man who has known a specific reckoning was coming and has finally run out of ways to defer it. He turned off the engine. The city's ambient noise reduced slightly, not to silence, because cities are never silent, but to the low constant undertow of millions of lives running in parallel. Rain began. The particular light rain of November in Washington, not committed enough to be called rain, not sparse enough to be called mist, just the cold, persistent presence of it, settling on the windshield and turning the streetlights into soft, scattered halos. "Raymond called me in November 2011, Briggs said. "Not on a secure line, just called me on a Tuesday evening. He told me he was taking it to the committee. He said the meeting was scheduled for the following week. He said he wanted me to know before it happened because he wanted me to be prepared for what came after." He stopped. She did not prompt him. "I called Harlan the next morning," he said. The rain on the windshield, the soft orange halos, the low noise of the city running underneath everything like a current that never stops. "I had a daughter," he said. "She was 11 years old. Her mother and I had separated 2 years before, but she was still my daughter. And Raymond was going to do something that was the right thing to do, and was also going to produce a response from people for whom violent responses were a professional instrument. He stopped, his jaw tightened. "I was afraid." He said it the way people say words that cost them something, plainly, without the softening that would have made it easier to say and harder to mean. "I was afraid," he said again. "So I called Harlan. I told myself I was giving Raymond a way out, that Harlan would approach him, find some resolution, give him a path. I told myself a number of things. I was very productive in the telling." He looked at the windshield. "Raymond died 3 weeks later," he said. "Training accident. Classified details. An officer with very clean shoes came to the house, and I couldn't look his wife in the eye. I couldn't look myself in the eye. But I was alive, and my daughter was alive, and I had made the choice that produced that outcome, and I had to find a way to live inside it." He turned and looked at her. She was looking at the windshield, at the rain collecting on the glass, at the way the streetlights blurred and ran in the water on the other side of it. She was not crying. She was somewhere deeper than crying, in the place where the most significant things land when they arrive, which is not the surface but the structure. Not emotion but architecture. The place where the things that change you actually do their work. She thought about her father making a phone call on a Tuesday evening in November 2011 to the man he trusted most in the world. She thought about what he had said in that call and what he had expected to happen afterward and what had actually happened. She thought about what it had cost Briggs to carry this for 12 years. She did not forgive him. She was not capable of that tonight, and she was not going to perform it. But she understood him, which was a different thing, not smaller, but genuinely different. Understanding and forgiveness were not the same currency. She sat with that distinction. The rain said what the moment needed said. Then her phone vibrated. She looked at it. The contact, expensive, reliable, formerly NSA, had sent 6 lines of text. She read them twice, then a third time to be certain. "Finch has been in contact with Harlan through a cutout for 8 months, she said. Every piece of operational planning for this mission crossed his desk. He knew about Georgetown. He sent those 2 men in tonight because he was afraid of what Harlan might tell me." Briggs was still. What was he afraid of? Everything we just talked about, and the fact that he has known from the beginning what I carry, the 47 names, the network. He's been working toward this for 8 months. He's not doing it for money. She looked at the rain on the glass. He actually believes that what Harlan does is a necessary function that the formal intelligence community can't perform within its constraints. He thinks he's maintaining the system by protecting the people who operate outside it. He's wrong. Yes, she put the phone in her pocket. He knows I'm getting close to the full picture. He's going to try to move before I can act on it. Meaning Tanner. She said it at the same moment her second phone, kept separate, given to three people, began to vibrate. She looked at it. The message was from the number she had given to a Senate Intelligence Committee staff director 3 years ago, a man who had told her he hoped she would never need to call him and had given her the number anyway because he understood the difference between hope and preparation. The message read, "Lock is gone. Safe house door was open. 20 minutes ago." She was already reaching for the door. Briggs had the engine running before she was fully in her seat. The safe house was 11 minutes away. They made it in 7. The apartment was exactly as described, clean, undisturbed, no signs of force, no signs of struggle. The door to Tanner's room was open. His jacket was gone. His phone, the clean one she had given him, was on the table. He had not taken the phone. She stood in the center of the room and read the space the way she read every space, looking for what it contained, for what it did not contain, for the gap between those two things where the actual information lived. The kitchen light was on. On the table beside his phone, a coffee cup that had been used and was still faintly warm. A newspaper he had apparently found somewhere in the apartment, folded on the counter, open to the crossword partially completed. And near the front door, barely distinguishable against the worn carpet, a small white rectangle. She crouched and picked it up without touching its edges. A card, printed, 4 words in clean block letters. Bring her to Maryland. She stood and looked at it. She thought he went voluntarily. There was only one thing they could have told him that would have made him go without his phone, without backup, without pausing to think. They had told him she was already there, that she was inside the facility, that she needed extraction, that this was his opportunity to be useful. It was a simple lie, and it would have worked precisely on someone who had spent 3 days learning to believe in the people around him. It would have worked especially on someone who had already watched her take a gun from a man twice her size and had said afterward with complete sincerity, "Be careful. Not for the mission, just be careful." She set the card back on the floor exactly where she had found it. She thought about Paige Decker, FBI special agent, who had been present in the Roslyn briefing when the Maryland facility's location was discussed, who arrived at every meeting early, who positioned herself with tactical precision while presenting as a professional analyst, who she had allocated 60% confidence to, and who had apparently been giving that confidence to Harlan for 5 years. She thought about the timeline, hour 42 of 48, 6 hours remaining. She looked at Briggs. 2 people, he said. The accounting of what they had. 2 people, she confirmed. No official support. We don't know how far the compromise goes beyond Finch and Decker. Maryland coast. Water approach from the south. The exterior coverage faces the road. We'd need to come in from the bay. Tide turns at 2:14. We'd want to move before that. I know a marina. He was already thinking past the logistics to the execution the way operators think, not sequentially but in parallel, all the pieces running simultaneously. Owner owes me a favor from about a decade ago. He won't ask questions. She picked up the phone on the table. Tanner's phone. She looked at it for a moment, the object that had been separated from its purpose, sitting alone in the specific way of a thing that has been left behind. She put it in her pocket. She looked at Briggs, who was standing in the doorway with his hands in the pockets of his canvas jacket, with the expression of a man who has arrived at a decision and is not uncertain about it. I failed your father, he said. I won't fail you. She looked at him. She did not say she forgave him because she wasn't sure yet and because she had never made claims she couldn't stand behind. What she said instead was the truth of what was available right now. Then let's go. They walked down the stairs and out into the cold rain of the November night, and the city went about its business around them in the ordinary way, and she walked through it with 47 names in her memory and 12 years of silence in whatever place the body stores the things that have not yet finished being what they are. 6 hours. She walked toward the car and got in. The Chesapeake Bay in November is not a forgiving body of water. It runs cold from the north at this time of year, the kind of cold that has weight and persistence, not the clean, sharp cold of mountain air, but a penetrating cold that works its way through neoprene and resolve in equal measure that makes the body argue with the mind about what is reasonable and what is simply necessary. The surface moved in low, irregular chop, no significant waves, just the constant motion of water that had never in its long history been entirely still. The shoreline to the east was a darkness against a slightly less dark sky, the facility invisible at distance, except for three things: a low-security light above the main dock entrance, the faint blue glow of a monitoring station visible through a high window on the north face of the main structure, and the particular quality of stillness that surrounds a place where people inside are paying careful attention to what might approach from the land and have not thought sufficiently about what might come from the water. This was the consistent failure of people who built security perimeters. They built them facing outward from the thing they were protecting. They accounted for roads and vehicles and human beings moving the way human beings moved in their imagination, purposefully in a straight line through doors. They thought about the obvious approaches. They underinvested in the water. Maya had been thinking about the water for 4 hours. She and Briggs entered the bay at 1:47 in the morning from a point 3/4 of a mile south of the facility in a flat-bottomed boat borrowed from a marina whose owner had asked no questions when Briggs called at 11 at night. Because this was the nature of certain favors, they did not come with the right to ask what they were for. The engine was cut 200 yards from the facility's dock. After that, paddles slow-timed to the rhythm of the chop so that the sound of movement was absorbed into the sound of the water itself. She wore a dark neoprene suit over lightweight tactical clothing. The P226 was in a waterproof holster at her right hip. The K-bar carbon steel 7-inch blade, a design that had been in service since World War II, because nothing that had come after it had been demonstrably better, was strapped to her left thigh. Her hair was pulled back and covered. Her face had been darkened with grease paint that Briggs had produced from a kit in the back of his car, with the matter-of-fact efficiency of a man who maintained such things because decades of experience had taught him that need rarely announced itself with adequate notice. Briggs was beside her. He moved quietly. He breathed quietly. He was 62 years old, and the piece of shrapnel from Mogadishu ached in cold water in ways he did not mention, and she knew this because she knew him, and she said nothing, because he would not have thanked her for it. The dock materialized out of the darkness, gradually the pilings first emerging as shapes against the slight luminescence of the water surface, then as solid structure, then as the specific reality of weathered wood and rope, and the smell of salt and diesel, and something organic and vaguely maritime. She caught a piling with one hand and held the boat steady. They had worked through the exterior positions during the drive building, the operational picture from her reconnaissance, and from Briggs's read of how facilities of this type were typically secured. 6 exterior guards, 2 on the south face covering the road approach, 2 on the north face, 1 on the roof with wide sight lines and a good angle on all approach vectors, and 1 floating position rotating between the dock area and the east wall on a circuit she had timed during her earlier reconnaissance at approximately 14 minutes. The floating position was the variable. The variable was always the problem. She had timed their arrival to fall between circuits. The dock was unwatched for the next 7 to 9 minutes based on the pattern she had established. Not generous, sufficient. She stepped out of the boat onto the dock with the quality of movement that had been trained into her body until it required no more conscious attention than breathing weight distributed precisely, each foot placed heel first, the full sole rolling down before the next step, the weight transfer so gradual that it produced no sound that the water's ambient noise would not absorb. Briggs followed. They secured the boat with a knot that could be released in under 2 seconds. She looked at the facility. The main structure was 40 meters from the dock. Between them, open ground poorly lit, which cut both ways, difficult for people inside looking out, but only slightly less difficult for people outside moving in. The camera on the northeast corner swept an arc that she had mapped. She moved through the bow in its coverage with the precision of someone who had done exactly this in conditions significantly less forgiving than a Maryland waterfront in November. She caught Briggs' eye. She held up 2 fingers and pointed left. He nodded once, the nod of a man who did not need anything repeated. They split. She went right along the wall of the secondary building, using it as cover for the approach to the main structure's eastern face. The eastern wall had 1 high dark window, 1 steel door, with a code lock panel. She did not touch the door yet. She moved to the southeast corner and stopped. From this position, she could see both guards on the south face, distant, unhurried, the posture of men in the midpoint of a quiet night who had no reason to expect an interruption. She could see the edge of the dock. She could not see Briggs, which meant he was correctly positioned. She waited. 38 seconds later, from the north side of the facility, a sound, not large. The specific metallic resonance of something falling, equipment a chain, the sound of an object that had no business falling on its own at 2 in the morning. Small enough to be ambiguous, specific enough to require attention. Both guards on the south face turned toward it reflexively. Not a tactical failure, a human reflex. The human reflex was the point. She moved. The emergency override on this model of code lock panel was a vulnerability that the manufacturer had not publicized and that the facility's security contractor had not been informed of because the individual inside that contractor who possessed the relevant knowledge had not chosen to share it through official channels. She had this information because she had asked for it from someone who had it, and she had asked approximately 2 weeks ago when she first understood where this would end. The door opened in 11 seconds. The interior of the facility resolved in the first 3 seconds of darkness-adjusted vision. The seafood processing infrastructure, occupying the front third tanks, refrigeration units, conveyor systems, all maintained with sufficient regularity to pass inspection. Behind them, through a wall that did not appear on the facility's registered floor plan, a different space entirely. A corridor clean and climate-controlled, 3 doors on the left, 1 on the right, server hum, recycled air. And from the far end of the corridor, a voice. She moved toward it. The door at the far end was not locked. She stopped beside it, not in front of it, and listened. One voice, low measured with the particular cadence of someone conducting a process. She identified it in approximately 2 seconds. Paige Decker. She could not distinguish the specific words. But the rhythm was the rhythm of questions being asked and answers being given, which meant Tanner was in the room, and responsive, which meant he was unharmed, and had not yet understood the full geometry of what he had walked into. She opened the door. Paige Decker was standing at a table in the center of a room furnished with the minimal utility of a space that existed for function: 2 chairs, a table, a wall screen showing exterior camera feeds, a communication console in the corner. Tanner was in one of the chairs, not restrained the specific posture of someone who has been cooperating because cooperation seemed like the reasonable approach. His expression when he saw her traveled from surprise to relief to something more complicated and more adult than either the expression of someone who had been in a bad situation and had managed to remain present enough to understand it was bad rather than simply waiting for it to end. Decker turned. She was a professional. The turn was smooth, the hand moving to the holster at her hip with trained efficiency. She was fast. Maya was faster. Not simply because she was younger and not simply because she was more practiced. Though both things were true, she was faster because she had made the decision before she opened the door, and Decker was still in the process of making hers, and the gap between those two states was measurable and decisive. The P226 was at Decker's eye level before Decker's weapon cleared the holster. They held that configuration for a moment. Decker's expression did not collapse. She was running the arithmetic that the situation required, and she was running it accurately, and she was arriving at the same conclusion Maya had already arrived at. "Put it down," Maya said. Decker looked at her. She calculated. She set the weapon on the table and took her hand away from it with the manner of someone who had made a decision and was implementing it cleanly. "You understand what you're doing," Decker said. "Yes. You understand what he is." "I'm about to find out the rest of it." A pause. "He's been waiting for you," Decker said. "Not just tonight, for a long time. That's not how men who intend violence behave." Maya considered this for exactly the time it deserved, which was not long. She went to the table and picked up Decker's weapon. She ejected the magazine and cleared the chamber and placed both components at opposite ends of the table, which took 4 seconds and left Decker disarmed in a manner that was thorough and not unkind. She looked at Tanner. "Are you hurt?" "No." "Steady. Can you walk?" "Yes." "Briggs is coming in from the north. He'll be in the eastern quarter in approximately 3 minutes. Go to him and stay with him. Don't move until I come back." Tanner stood. He looked at Decker, then at Maya with the expression of someone who had a question and had determined it could wait. "They told me you were here," he said. "Inside, that you needed extraction." "I know," she said. He nodded. He looked at her one more time. "Be careful," he said. "Not the way people say it as punctuation. The way people say it when they mean it." "Go," she said. He went. She looked at Decker. "Stay here." Decker sat down in the chair Tanner had vacated. Her expression was the expression of someone who had looked at the arithmetic of her situation and found it thoroughly unfavorable and was deciding how to occupy the time while it completed itself. Maya walked out of the room and down the corridor toward the door at the far end. She stopped in the corridor for 30 seconds. She took out the secondary phone, the one with the number she had been given 3 years ago by a Senate Intelligence Committee staff director, who had said when he gave it to her that he hoped she would never need to use it. She had told him when she accepted the number that she had 4 specific requirements for whenever she did a federal arrest team at a specific type of location: a secure evidence chain, a protected transfer protocol for assets across multiple countries, and complete operational silence for the first 72 hours. He had said he understood. She had believed him. She dialed. He answered on the first ring. She gave him the address, the timeline, and the 4 requirements. He said, "How long do we have?" She said, "They're already inside the building." He said, 40 minutes. She ended the call and put the phone away. She had 38 minutes. She went to find Victor Harlan. The room at the far end of the north quarter was the largest in the facility, rectangular, configured with deliberate simplicity, as though someone had thought carefully about what it needed to contain and had been disciplined about limiting it to those things. A desk, 2 chairs, a console against the far wall, a window small and high through which the dark surface of the bay was visible in the lower portion of the frame. On the desk, in the center of an otherwise completely clear surface, a USB drive. Victor Harlan was sitting in one of the chairs, not at the desk, but to the side of it, the position of someone who had arrived early and settled in to wait and had been waiting long enough to reach the stillness that exists on the other side of impatience. He was holding a glass of whiskey. He was looking at the window. He did not appear surprised when she came in. He did not appear relieved. He appeared more than anything like a man who had arrived at the end of a road that had been very long and was taking a moment to simply register the fact. She stood in the doorway. The P226 was in her hand, held at her side, present but not raised. "Sit down," he said, not a command, an invitation from a man who understood he was not in a position to issue commands and was not attempting to. She sat. He looked at her in the low light. The facility's ambient hum was quieter here. The sound of the water outside the window was more present, the irregular rhythm of the bay continuous and indifferent to what was happening in the room above it. "I want to finish what I started to tell you in Georgetown," he said. "Then tell me." He set the whiskey glass down and folded his hands in his lap with the manner of a man preparing to give testimony, not to any official body, but to the specific and binding authority of the person sitting across from him, which he appeared to regard as the most legitimate jurisdiction currently available. "Your father found out about Black Compass in 2009, he said. "I told you this. What I did not tell you in Georgetown is the full shape of what happened during the 2 years before he moved on it." She said nothing. She was watching him with the complete attention she reserved for things that mattered most, not the performance, not the surface, but the places between the words where the actual information lived. When Raymond encountered the financial architecture in 2009, Harlan said his first response was not to report it immediately, not because he was complicit, not because he was afraid. Because he was methodical and he understood better than almost anyone I had ever worked with that a case built on incomplete information causes more damage to the truth than no case at all. He had watched investigations collapse because the foundation was insufficient. He had watched guilty people avoid accountability because the case against them had holes. He paused. So he built the case for 2 years. He documented everything accessible to him. He followed every thread. He was thorough in a way that was extraordinary even by his own standards. He was building something that could not be dismissed, could not be deflected, could not be explained away. She kept her hands still. "But here is what I need you to understand," he said, and his voice had changed slightly, not softer, but more direct, with the specific quality of someone arriving at the part they have been working toward. When he found the edge of it in 2009, he found enough to act on. Not everything, not the complete picture, but sufficient. He had evidence of the program's existence, of the financial flows of specific transactions. It was not complete, but it was actionable. He looked at her. "He chose to wait 2 more years, he said, and in those 2 years, 3 people died as a direct result of intelligence that Black Compass sold. 3 people who were assets in networks that your father had, he moved in 2009, might have been able to protect." The room held the statement. She was aware of the weight of it. She was aware of the shape of what was being said, not that her father was corrupt, not that he had abandoned anything he had sworn to protect, but that he had made a calculation, a human calculation carefully considered, professionally defensible and costly in ways he could not fully have anticipated when he made it. "He didn't know," she said. "No." Harlan agreed. He didn't know that those specific people would be compromised in that specific window. He was making a judgment about evidence and process and the responsible construction of a case that would survive. The judgment was not wrong on its own terms. It was a reasonable professional decision made by a principled man. A pause. And 3 people died while he was making it. She looked at the USB drive on the desk. "Why are you telling me this?" she said. He leaned forward, the first time he had shifted his posture since she entered the room. "Because I owe it to him," he said. "Because he was the most principled man I ever worked with, and I ordered his death, and the least I can do, the absolute floor of what I owe him, is to ensure that his daughter understands who he actually was. Not the simplified version. Not the hero with the classified details neatly closed. The real version." He paused. "The version that was brave and principled and exceptional and also made a decision that cost 3 people their lives, because that is what real people are. They contain all of those things simultaneously. And the particular tragedy of people who exist in classified spaces is that the world never gets to understand them as the whole and complicated human beings they actually were." She looked at him. "And the other reason," she said. He sat back. "The other reason," he said, "is that I need you to make a decision tonight, and I need you to make it with the full information. Everything, not the partial version." He stood and went to the desk and looked at the USB drive without picking it up. "That drive contains the complete record of Operation Black Compass," he said. "Every transaction, every intermediary, every asset compromised, every name involved at every level, including mine. Including 11 other names, people currently in positions of significant authority across government, intelligence, and the private sector." He looked at the drive. "Including the complete record of the 2 years between 2009 and 2011, with full documentation of your father's investigation, the timeline of what he knew, and the timeline of what he chose to do with it." He turned to face her. "If you take that to the Senate Intelligence Committee," he said, "it ends me. It ends 11 other people. It produces the most significant intelligence accountability crisis since Iran-Contra, probably larger. Congressional hearings, criminal referrals, the unraveling of a significant portion of the intelligence architecture built over 30 years, some of which is genuinely important and some of which was what I was doing." He held her gaze. "And it produces a complete public record that includes your father's investigation and its timeline. Which means that the story of Raymond Cole in the public record, in the newspapers, in the proceedings, will not be the story of a hero who discovered corruption and died trying to expose it. It will be the story of a man who discovered corruption and waited 2 years to act, during which 3 people died. Not because he was bad, because he was human, because he calculated." He looked at the drive, then at her. "That is one option," he said. "The other option is that you take only the list of 47 names. You protect them. Get them extracted, get them relocated, burn the current operational architecture, and rebuild it cleanly. I can facilitate the transfer of the infrastructure necessary to do that before dawn." He paused. "And you leave the rest. Black Compass buried, my name buried, the 11 other names buried, the timeline buried, and your father's reputation intact, the hero who died in a classified training accident, the clean sorrow of a fallen warrior undisturbed." He placed the drive on the edge of the desk closest to her. "That is your choice, Maya," he said, "and only yours." The water outside the window, the facility's hum, the P226 in her hand at her side, neither raised nor holstered. She looked at the drive. She thought about her father sitting on a back porch in the summer of 2010, and a matchbook placed on the porch railing, and a flame tilting northeast in the still air, and a voice explaining that some things simply were what they were and did not require interpretation. She thought about him completely. Not the simplified version, not the clean hero, but the real man who had found something corrupt and decided to build the most airtight possible case against it, and had been wrong about the cost of the 2 years it required, and who had then acted anyway with everything he had when the case was ready, and who had died for it. She thought about what that man, that real complicated, principled, imperfect man, would do if he were sitting in this room right now with this specific choice in front of him. She thought she knew. She stood. She picked up the drive. She held it and looked at it, small plastic, unremarkable in its physical form, containing the weight of 12 years and 3 dead people, and her father's reputation and 11 careers, and the kind of truth that does not improve with burial, that becomes heavier and more expensive the longer it is kept underground. "I'm going to take this to the Senate Intelligence Committee," she said. "Everything on it, the complete record." Harlan looked at her. "Including the timeline," she said. "Including my father's 2 years, including all of it." A silence. "You understand what that means for his reputation," he said. I understand what it means for the truth, she said. My father died because he did not want the truth buried anymore. He spent 2 years building a case so solid it could not be dismissed, and then he moved on it, and you had him killed for it. If I take the convenient part of the truth and leave the rest underground, I am doing exactly what he died trying to stop. She looked at him directly. He wasn't perfect, she said. He was real. A real man who tried to do the right thing and paid for it with his life deserves to have the full truth told about him. Not the version that's easy to carry, the version that's true. She paused. That's the only thing I can give him now. And I'm going to give it to him. The room was very quiet. Harlan looked at her for a long time with the expression of a man who has been waiting for a specific thing for 12 years and has just watched it arrive in exactly the form he had not been able to be certain of, but had hoped for. Your father would have made the same choice, he said. She looked at him. I know, she said. That's why I made it. She put the drive in her jacket pocket. She looked at him one more time, at this man who had saved her father's life in Kuwait in March of 1991 and ordered his death in Virginia in November of 2011, who had built something corrupt and run it for a decade and then spent the following decade preparing for this conversation, who was neither the simple villain the story required nor the complicated human being the truth described, but somehow genuinely both at once in the way that people who cause real damage in the real world generally manage to be. It's over, she said. He nodded, the nod of a man who had known for a long time that this was the shape of it and had made whatever peace was available to him with that knowledge. Slowly, incompletely, but made, she left. The eastern quarter was empty. The door to the room where she had left Decker was closed. At the far end, Briggs was standing with one hand on Tanner's shoulder and the expression of a man who has been in many difficult situations and has learned to read by the quality of someone's walk, whether the situation has resolved or merely changed form. He read her walk correctly. His shoulders dropped a fraction of an inch. Not relief exactly, but the specific physical release of a tension that has been held for a very long time and has finally been authorized to let go. She reached them. She looked at Tanner. He looked at her. Are you all right? He asked. She thought about what was in her jacket pocket. She thought about 47 people living their lives in 9 countries, none of whom knew her name. She thought about 3 people who had died while a good man built the best possible case, and about what that good man had chosen to do when the case was ready, and about the fact that she was standing in a building on the Maryland coast at 2:43 in the morning because she was his daughter, and that this was not a burden she would have given away. Yes, she said, and then because it was true, and because he had earned the honesty, not entirely, but enough. She looked at Briggs. Let's go home, she said. They went. What's wrong? Garrett Finch had spent the 6 hours between Georgetown and dawn doing what analysts do when a situation has moved beyond their control he had documented. His apartment in Bethesda contained, when agents arrived at 6:14 in the morning, a complete written account of his involvement with Victor Harlan over the preceding 8 months. Every piece of information passed, every decision made, the reasoning behind each of those decisions set out in the flat and precise professional language of someone who had accepted the consequences well in advance of their arrival. It was thorough and methodical and written in the same careful style as every report he had ever produced for the agency. One of the arresting agents would later say it read less like a confession than like a case file built to withstand scrutiny. She thought this was consistent with who Garrett Finch actually was, a man who believed in documentation even when the document indicted himself. He had been wrong about almost everything. He had been thorough about being wrong. He also cooperated fully. He said very little beyond what was written down. Paige Decker was taken at the Maryland facility within the hour. She also cooperated and also said very little, with the composure of someone who had understood for some time that her choices were going to produce a specific set of consequences and had arrived at a place of settled, exhausted acceptance about it. Victor Harlan was still in the room at the end of the North Corridor when the agents arrived. He was sitting in the same chair she had left him in. He had finished the whiskey. He handed over his weapon without being asked, and he extended his wrist for the handcuffs with a matter-of-fact courtesy that one of the senior agents would later describe in a report that would be read by people with significant clearances as the most composed arrest he had witnessed in 21 years of work. The 47 names were processed through a parallel channel that operated outside the formal criminal case, a necessity that required the cooperation of 2 Senate Intelligence Committee staffers who worked through the night and into the following afternoon, cross-referencing the list against current operational deployments and initiating the notification and extraction process. The process took 3 weeks to complete in full. Every one of the 47 assets was accounted for. Not one was lost. The USB drive was delivered to the Senate Intelligence Committee's secure facility at 8:47 in the morning. A senior staff member signed for it. He looked at the drive and then at the woman who had brought it, who was 26 years old with a cut on her left arm from moving too quickly past a piece of exposed metal in the eastern corridor of a Maryland waterfront facility. And he said, "Is this complete?" She said, "Everything." He nodded. He took the drive into the secured area. She stood in the corridor outside for a moment. Then she went out into the thin November light of a Washington morning and sat on a bench across the street and looked at nothing in particular for approximately 10 minutes. Then she went home. 3 weeks later, Tanner Locke received a letter. It did not have a letterhead or an official designation or any of the language of bureaucratic correspondence. It was a single handwritten page from a senior officer in the Directorate of Operations whose name Tanner had read in the public record without expecting to correspond with directly. The letter was brief. It acknowledged in language that was careful and unambiguous that Tanner had done what he was supposed to do and had been failed by the people whose function was to protect him for doing it. It offered a formal role if he wanted it in a capacity the writer believed suited both his demonstrated skills and his character. It said that the intelligence community needed people who believed in the mission of the institution and were willing to act on that belief even when the institution failed to deserve it. The last line was added in a different pen after the signature, written as the kind of afterthought that is not an afterthought at all. "The woman who got you out of that building in Maryland is someone worth learning from. Pay attention to everything she does." He called Maya when he received it. She was at her kitchen table with coffee that was for once the right temperature, which was a small thing and a good one. Outside the kitchen window, the Arlington street was conducting its ordinary morning business, the same business it conducted every morning, indifferent to what had or hadn't happened on the other side of the previous weeks. "They offered me a position," he said. "I know. Will you take it?" A pause that contained more thinking than its length suggested. "The system isn't what I thought it was," he said. "No. It's more complicated. It fails. Sometimes people inside it deliberately make it fail." "Yes. But it's still the system," he said. "And someone has to be inside it who—" He stopped, reconsidered. "Who pays attention, who actually believes in what it's supposed to be even when it isn't that." She looked out the kitchen window at the ordinary street. A woman walked past with a dog. A man in a gray coat stopped at the corner and moved on. "Take the position," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "Then the things Harlan said about your father. What's in the record now?" "Yes." "Does it change how you think about him?" She considered this carefully with the respect the question deserved. "It makes me think about him more clearly," she said finally. "More completely. And I think that's better, more real than the version I had before, even though the version I had before was easier to carry." She paused. "He was real. That's what I know now that I didn't know before. Not a symbol, not a clean story. A real man who did extraordinary things and made human mistakes and in the end chose the right thing and paid the full price for it." She looked at the window. "That turns out to be more than enough, more than I expected to get." The call ended. She sat at the table with the coffee and the window and the thin, persistent light of a Tuesday morning in November, and she thought about things without organizing the thinking into anything more structured than what it naturally was. The quiet, ongoing work of someone who has been through something significant and is sitting with the aftermath of it, which has its own requirements and its own timeline and cannot be rushed. She thought about 47 people waking up in various cities on various continents, none of whom knew her name, none of whom would ever know what had been held in her memory for 3 years or how close those ordinary lives had come to not continuing. She thought this was exactly right. She thought the fact that they would never know was precisely what made it worth doing. She thought about her father for a long time. She thought about him the way she now had permission to think about him. Not the simplified version, not the hero with the classified details closed, but as himself a man of exceptional ability and genuine principle, who had looked at a corrupt program and decided to build the most complete possible case against it, and had calculated that 2 years was the correct investment in that case and had been wrong about the cost of those 2 years, and who had then acted anyway fully with everything he had when the case was ready and had died for it. A man, real and complicated and gone and known now finally as himself. She thought, "I know you now. I think that's what you wanted." jail. The cemetery was in Virginia Beach, 20 minutes from the house where she had grown up, in a part of the city that was quiet in the way of places where the main business is remembering. The grass was November brown. The sky was the flat, persistent gray of a winter that had decided to arrive early and was not interested in argument. Briggs stood beside her. They had driven down together that morning without discussing much on the way, not the hearings that had been announced the previous week, not Finch's cooperation agreement, not the investigation that was going to produce over the coming months, the kind of reckoning that Washington generated every generation or so. They had stopped for coffee at a place on Route 64 that Briggs had been stopping at for 20 years, not because it was exceptional, but because it was consistent, and he was a man who trusted consistent things. They had drunk the coffee in the parking lot in the thin early light and watched the highway do its ordinary work. On the drive, he had asked about Tanner. She had told him about the letter and the position. He had said, "Good kid." She had said yes. That had been sufficient. The headstone was simple: Raymond Cole, the dates, his rank, the branch. Nothing that conveyed the nature of his death. Nothing that conveyed the nature of his life, which was how it was with military deaths of a certain kind. The official record was a smooth, closed surface. She had written something herself on the drive down on a piece of notepaper she found in the glove compartment because she had decided that what she wanted here was not the formal language of testimony, but something more personal and more direct. 6 sentences. His name. What he found and what he did. What it come on, what she had done about it. What she thought it meant now that she knew all of it. She folded it and placed it at the base of the headstone. The wind lifted one corner slightly. She watched the folded paper for a moment. She thought about a Tuesday in summer on a back porch in a flame that tilted northeast, in what her father had meant by showing her that not just the lesson about wind, but the larger lesson underneath it, the one about what it meant to read the world honestly and act on what the honest reading revealed. He had been teaching her that her whole childhood, in small ways and large ones, through demonstration rather than instruction. He had been preparing her for something, though neither of them could have named what it was. She thought about the 2 years between 2009 and 2011 and the 3 people who had died in that window, and the calculation that had seemed professionally reasonable and had cost what it cost. She thought about what it meant that she was standing here with that knowledge rather than with the clean version. It meant he was real to her now in a way he had not been before, not the elevated, simplified version that grief and secrecy had constructed, but the actual person with his extraordinary gifts and his human limitations and his final fatal correct choice. She thought, this is harder than the other version. She thought, and it is so much better. Briggs reached into his jacket pocket and took out a photograph she recognized. 3 men in civilian clothes squinting into bright sun, Kuwait City, March 1991. The 3rd day after liberation, the day after the day that Harlan had described and would not describe in detail. Raymond Cole and Victor Harlan and Thomas Briggs, all of them young, all of them alive in the specific conscious way of people who have recently been reminded that this was not guaranteed. Briggs crouched and placed the photograph at the base of the headstone beside her folded paper. He weighted it with a small stone from the path so the wind wouldn't take it. He stood back up. He stood there. She stood there. The wind moved across the brown grass. Somewhere in the distance, a bird was doing something persistent and ordinary in a bare tree. The flat gray sky held its position without committing to anything. She did not say anything. Briggs did not say anything. They had come to the place beyond words, the specific fullness of having said enough, of having arrived at the point where words were beside the point and presence was sufficient and correct. They stayed for a while. Then Briggs said very quietly to the headstone, rather than to her, in the voice of someone paying a debt that can only be partially paid, "I should have stood with you." The wind moved. She put her hand briefly on his arm. Not forgiveness, not yet, maybe not fully, maybe that would take the time it required, but acknowledgement. The recognition that he was here now, that he had told the truth when it was costly to tell it, that he had gone into a waterfront facility in the dark with her without hesitation, that people were capable of doing the wrong thing, and then given sufficient time and sufficient pain, doing the right one. She took her hand away. They walked back to the car. She drove on the way home. Briggs sat in the passenger seat with his hands flat on his thighs and his eyes on something beyond the road. Not the road, not the trees, not the highway. Signage. Something further out on the other side of distance, visible only to him. She let him look at it. She drove. The city came back gradually, the way cities always do. The first exits, the thickening traffic, the familiar geometry of a place you return to, often enough that you stop seeing it and then occasionally see it freshly from a different angle and remember something about why you are here and not somewhere else. She drove, and the drive was ordinary and good and ordinary, and good were things she had not always had enough of, and she did not take them for granted. 1 year later, the office was not large, which suited her. It had a window that faced east and caught the morning light well, and it had a door she could close, and it had a clear line of sight from the desk to the hallway, and these were the things that mattered. The work was different in its specifics from what she had done before, and similar in its architecture. The architecture of paying careful and sustained attention to things that mattered and acting with precision on what that attention revealed. She had been doing this in one form or another since she was 12 years old, and her father had started teaching her to read rooms. The settings had changed. The fundamental activity had not. On the desk in the position she had designated for the things that were not operational, but were nonetheless necessary, there were two photographs. The first was the one that had been face down on the shelf in her Arlington apartment for 3 years. Raymond Cole and the 3-year-old girl, he was holding both of them, laughing with the whole-body completeness of people who are inside a moment of uncomplicated happiness. The back still read, "For Maya, be harder than the world expects you to be." Dad, 1998. It was face up. It had been face up since the night she came back from Virginia Beach with the photograph and Briggs and the full weight of who her father actually was. Face up meant looked at directly, which was the only way she was willing to look at things anymore. The simplified version had been easier. The true version was better. She had made her choice about which kind of person she wanted to be, and the photographs on her desk were part of that choice. The second photograph was newer, taken 3 months ago at a small internal ceremony that had not been announced publicly, the kind of recognition that certain work received from the people who understood what it was, offered without fanfare. Because fanfare was not the point. She was in the photograph, and Briggs was in the photograph, and Tanner Locke was in the photograph. He was smiling with the expression of someone who had traveled a significant distance and arrived somewhere he had not known he was heading toward and found it was the right place. Her phone rang. She looked at it. The number was not saved in her contacts. She picked it up on the second ring. The voice on the other end was unhurried, careful in the specific way of someone who had learned caution from experience rather than from training. Not the practiced smoothness of a man who had been taught to sound like nothing. The earned carefulness of a man who had found out what happened when you were not careful and had adjusted accordingly. "Ms. Cole," the voice said, "my name is not something I'll give you over this line, but I need about 45 minutes if you're willing. There is a situation that requires someone with your particular background and your particular way of working." She looked out the window. The November light was doing what November light did, thin, persistent, trying regardless of the cloud cover, making its case for itself without drama and without giving up. She looked at the photograph of her father and the 3-year-old girl face up, seen clearly. She looked at the photograph of Briggs and Tanner and herself at a ceremony in a room she was not going to describe in a document that anyone could read. She picked up a pen. "Give me the address," she said, "and tell me what I'm walking into." She wrote down the address. She read it back to confirm. She listened to the brief and careful description of the situation and asked 3 questions, and the answers to those questions told her what she needed to know about whether this was the kind of work she was willing to do. It was. She put the pen down. She stood up. She looked at the 2 photographs one more time, at her father's face and her own 3-year-old face in the specific quality of that particular moment, uncomplicated and whole and gone now for 23 years, and somehow in the way that real things persist, still present. Still informing what she chose to do, and how she chose to do it, and what she was willing to pay for the things that mattered. She put on her jacket. She looked at the photograph of Raymond Cole one last time. "She thought I know what you were trying to tell me. On the porch with the match, not just about the wind. You were telling me to read the world honestly and act on what the honest reading showed me, regardless of what it cost." "I heard you," she thought. "I'm still hearing you." She went to do the work.